So Anthony, thank you. Welcome, everyone. I am Tina Games, Chair of Division 7 for the Massachusetts Association of School Committees. I'm with the Monomoy Regional School Committee, where I am Vice Chair, and want to welcome everyone. Tonight's session is engaging with the public. So welcome, everyone. If you're just entering the room, please do introduce yourself in the chat. Tell us what school committee you are with. And while you're doing that, I'm going to introduce our panel this evening. So we will begin our conversation within our panel, and then we're going to open it up for your questions. So in our panel this evening, so I've introduced myself, Tina Games, Chair of Division 7 with the Monomoy Regional School Committee. I'm joined this evening by Vice Chair, Division 7, Kathy Lewis, who is also the Vice Chair of Mashpee School Committee.
Hi,
And
everyone.
our Secretary Treasurer from Division 7, April Rossi, who is with the Wareham School Committee.
Hello,
And
everyone.
hello, yes. And welcome to our Board of Directors member, Stephanie Clarity, with the Carver School Committee. She is the Secretary Treasurer, and she is on the Mask Board of Directors, and also is our Field Director with the Massachusetts Association of School Committee, Sean Costello, who is with the Marshfield School Committee. So I want to, again, welcome everyone to engaging with the public. With the many difficult decisions that school committee members have to make, what are best practices for dealing with public outcry? How do we manage challenging public comment periods, an influx of emails, social media accusations, requests from comments from the press? We're looking forward this evening to an interactive discussion on how to handle public engagement during a time of crisis and discord. We're going to start with a few questions that were submitted ahead of time. Then we're going to take audience questions, which you can type in the chat box. So if you have a question at any point during tonight's conversation, please in the chat box, put the word question in capital letters, if you would, and then follow it with your question. It just helps us identify when we do get to the question portion of tonight's conversation. We just want to make sure we don't miss your question. And as we move through the various questions, we'd also like to invite audience participation as it relates to best practices. Some of you have been in a lot of situations and probably have a wonderful best practice to share with all of us. And if you want to put that in the chat, if you would just put best practice in front of your comment, we would appreciate it so we can identify that and read it out and share it to everyone. We are going to be working in the chat room this evening, but if you feel called to ask your question or share your best practice verbally, that is perfectly fine. You can just raise your virtual hand. And at the bottom of the Zoom screen, you will see a react button. If you click on that, you'll see a raise hand option. So we are going to be working in the chat this evening, but again, if you would like to verbally ask your question, make your comment, perfectly fine. All right, so with all of that being said, we are going to begin tonight's conversation with questions that were submitted ahead of time. And then again, we're going to open it up after this conversation to take your questions and your comments. So here's the first question. We're all going through budget season, which always involves difficult conversations, whether it's our financial asks of our town select boards or city councils, or maybe it's a program cut that we have to make for budgeting reasons, leading to apparent outcry. How do we navigate the tightrope we often walk as school committee members, keeping our commitment to high quality education for all students while being good stewards of the taxpayer dollar? Sean, I think I'm going to begin this question with you.
Sure. So it's a great question to kick off because I think everybody on this call recognizes that this is a very difficult budget cycle. And before I keep going any further, I do just want to very quickly introduce myself as the new field director for MASC. I've been on board for about 2 months now, having taken Jim Hardy's position after he retired. So I know a lot of folks on this call are in the Southeastern Division that I cover. So if I haven't met you yet, I look forward to doing so and look forward to working with you. And thank you, Tina, and everybody at Division 7 for putting this together and having me on. But it's a tough budget cycle right now. I think almost every community in Massachusetts is feeling it. Rising costs are certainly harming a lot of districts. And there's coupling that with an outcry in a lot of different areas for more fiscal conservative policies or anything along those lines. And that's something that the communities, certainly in my area, have been seeing from our citizens. So what I always say to folks here in Marshfield, where I've been on the school committee for 10 years, that we do have an obligation to the taxpayers. It's our job to make sure that we are providing a quality education with the taxpayers in mind. But our number one constituency is the students. And that makes being on a school committee a very unique elected position because we shouldn't be answering to the taxpayers as our number one constituency. We should be answering to the students. That's what they elect us to do. So as we navigate those tough times, we have to keep in mind that what's good for students is also good for taxpayers. Your public education in your community impacts absolutely everything. And if you've got a decent town or city council, if you've got a decent town administrator or town manager, they're going to recognize that strong schools make a strong community. And that's something that we've been advocating for in Marshfield for a long time. Again, it is a tightrope because every community, not just in public education, but just as community funding as a whole, is going through a difficult budget time right now. And there's going to be all sorts of talk about how schools have to be team players and make sure that we're not trying to take all of the revenue and just the age-old isms that you hear from the town side pretty much every year. I'm not speaking to anybody who doesn't know what I'm talking about right now. So there's going to be all sorts of outcry for that. But what we have to hold the line on as school committee members is that a strong public education makes a strong community, and that funding your public education and serving the needs of your students does serve the needs of your taxpayers.
Thank you for that, Sean. If I could just have a quick follow-up before I
Mhm.
open it up to the rest of the panel. Because you do work with a lot of school committees in the
Mhm.
Southeast Division,
Mhm.
do you notice any difference between select boards, city council? Is there any difference in speaking to members when we're advocating for the budget?
Well, you know what? I think it's a community by community sort of basis from what I've seen. I was just at a dinner last week hosted by MASC President Jason Frazier and had the opportunity to talk to some school committee members, some of whom I see on here now. Um, and there's some who have great relationships with their town council. There's some who have kind of strained relationships with the town that have been heading that way for years. And I think it's really a case by case basis. Obviously, a town and a city are two totally different areas. I see, folks on here from small towns, kind of like Marshfield's not a small town, but it's certainly not a big city. And then I see there's folks on here from Quincy. Those are two totally different animals, and advocating with those groups will certainly be different. But I think it just goes back to, again, the job of the school committee member at the end of the day is to advocate for the needs of the students. And when you're speaking to somebody who's in a position to approve your budget, whether that be a city councilor or a select board member, it's all the same message.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to open it up to the rest of our panel if anybody would like to jump in on this question. Kathy, Stephanie, April?
I I just want to add, and it's not just the town manager, town administrator, mayor. I think a lot of it too, especially in some communities here on the Cape, and potentially off Cape as well, where the majority of the people, like we still have town meeting here. So in my town, a lot of our communication isn't just with our select board and our town manager. We have to then communicate why our school, not necessarily justify, but in a sense justify why our school is asking what we're asking for. And what we found here in Mashpee is making those connections with our community. We've connected with one of the 55 plus communities, Southport, and they call themselves the Southport Falcons. They're one of our greatest sources of volunteers. But getting them into the schools to see what their tax dollars are being applied to, why our budget looks the way it looks, they become one of our allies and spokespeople, in a sense, that help spread that message of this is why the budget is. We are advocating for the students, but they're actually able to see what those students are doing with those funds. And I think if you're able to, in your community, make those connections to the taxpayers who don't necessarily have children in the district, which in most of our towns and cities, that's the majority of the people, you might find you're having allies, not only in the classroom helping teachers and faculty and getting those volunteer people in, but also outside of the school saying, hey, did you know that the robotics club made it to Worlds? Or did you happen to see the football team made it to divisionals? Or, you know, it adds this layer of advocacy, in a sense, for your budget. So that's kind of what we've found has been very successful here. So it's not just that intergovernmental kind of committee to committee. You got to get a little bit outside of that box just as much as you work within it, is what we found.
I appreciate that, Kathy. Very, very good advice. Stephanie, April, anything to add?
I can just add that for our school committee in Wareham, we focus on the beginning of all our meetings with good news, where we share a lot of the goings on with the community via our televised meetings. And we also have a very robust relationship with our student representative. And having the student representative present and be engaged and
Okay, April has dropped. I know she was having internet difficulty, but we'll make sure we get what she was sharing. Stephanie, anything to add?
So I will really quickly build off of what Kathy had said about community. In Carver, we're a small town. We don't have a large, commercial revenue stream in Carver. Cranberry farmers, beautiful community. Love my town in many ways. But I felt like our district wasn't sharing with our community at large how our tax dollars were being spent. And our taxes here are high for not a lot of services. So one thing that we've really focused on over the last 2 years is really branding our district and building up our social media presence so we can share what our students and our teachers are accomplishing, whether it be in the arts, chorus or drama, of course, our athletics, but other events and achievements that our students and our teachers are earning. So that's been it's been really nice to see as a school committee member, being out in the community and having people approach and say, oh, gee, I saw this and that's great and that's amazing, versus just hearing people, maybe criticizing a little bit or wondering, what is happening over there, because nothing's shared. So now it's more of a an open door, so to speak. Like we share events that are happening in our community on our website, and we encourage people from our community to attend, whether it be a concert or an athletic event or a presentation or the book fair. So we're really trying to, invite the community in so that they really can see where their tax dollars are spent. I know I've lived here for 20 years and my tax bill has quadrupled. So I have, my son's a freshman in high school, so I have a little bit of a connection, but I'm not so connected to the elementary school anymore, which is why also as a school committee, we have committed to going to events in our district so we can stay connected also. So I think it really is about that connection and that sense of community, because we are one community. It isn't the town versus the school or the school versus the town, right? There's one pot of money. We have to find a way to make sure that everyone's receiving the best that they can.
I appreciate that. And I'm just going to add, as a regional school committee, one of the things that we have found effective at Monomoy is just really working with our liaisons, whoever our liaison might be with our select boards in each town, making sure they're invited to budget meetings, making sure they're part of the process. I mean, we've learned to try to include those individuals from the start so that there are no surprises. And also, as Kathy was pointing out earlier, just making sure that, word is out, all these wonderful, great things, and partnering with our local access channel and trying to feature, have like ours is channel 18 locally, trying to feature different things that are happening, making sure people understand, like when our theater performances and our sports and things like that are happening. I see a question in the chat, and I will definitely pull that in when we get to later in the conversation. So thank you for that. Let's move on to the next question, which is, let's say that we are facing a decision that might be controversial, which happens a lot. What steps can we take to ensure that we've done our due diligence, knowing that not everyone is going to be happy with the outcome? Stephanie, I'm going to start with you on this one.
Okay. So whenever there is an issue that is a hot topic, I mean, honestly, any issue, but especially when it's an issue that's a hot topic, we will share information with our community on multiple different levels. I understand and appreciate not everyone's on social media, so we do use School Status Connect for our families that we also send out information on. And we've really built up our website so that it's easy for people to go to our website and find more information about what's happening in the district. So we have, I think, what I think are excellent presentations at our meeting. We have a background agenda that's shared with school committee members so we can see what's on our agenda prior to our meeting. So we can make sure that we have a solid understanding of whatever this issue may be. And then one thing I always do is if it's something that we're discussing at a meeting, I always make sure to ask questions. Questions that I may already know the answer to, but I want those questions answered for the community and for the public to see. Because not everyone understands or has exposure to everything a school committee does. So it's a matter of also of leaning into curiosity, being empathetic. You know, and sometimes I've had to agree to disagree with people. It can be difficult to not take things personally because I'm super passionate about public education and about providing students with everything they need to be as successful as they possibly can be once they graduate and while they're a member of of our school community. So it really is leaning into that curiosity to me and trying to find out why they're so upset, what they're concerned about, and then do everything in my power to answer that question, not only for them, but then also to make sure that we share that question and that answer at our school committee meeting. So we try to be as transparent as possible and have those difficult conversations.
Thank you for that. Anybody else in the panel?
I'll jump in here too and say, as school committee members and especially now when there's so many different things happening with school districts everywhere, it is not your job, it's not our job to beat people over the head with information and like totally bring absolutely everything we're doing directly to their doorstep. But it does serve us well if there's a controversial issue coming up to make sure that we're taking steps, kind of like what Stephanie was saying, to communicate that to the community, that there is something of interest that may be coming up. One thing we do well in Marshfield is our superintendent has a weekly newsletter. And if we have a school committee meeting coming up and there's something potentially controversial, the superintendent will include that this is what we're discussing at this meeting. And that goes to every family in the district. And it just makes it so, I'll give an example of 2 years ago in Marshfield, we voted to implement a bus fee, which I know most people do have, but we were one of the last communities that didn't have it. And parents, as you can imagine, were not thrilled. And there was, some outcry that we hadn't properly communicated that we were going to be discussing this. So we started to examine that and think that, yes, while we needed this bus fee, maybe they have a point that we needed to make a little bit more of an effort as a committee to get the word out there that we were discussing this. So ever since then, the superintendent's newsletter has included that kind of news tidbit if we are going to be discussing something of controversy, just to be sure that folks have that right there in their inbox as parents in the district.
Thank you for that. Anybody else in the panel want to weigh in on that question? I'm going to add, and I'm going to do a follow-up question to the panel on this because Monomoy certainly had a situation a few years ago where it felt, actually, we've had two, where it felt important to have a community forum. Like, so I guess I want to say to the panel, at what point, kind of doing our due diligence, do we decide we may need to have a forum on this before we take such a vote? So I don't know if anybody wants to weigh in on that.
Sure. We have I'm sure everyone has an annual budget hearing every year. But if there is, there was one year we were looking at having to cut two programs from our district, our French language program and our art program for high school. And it was awful to, have to make that type of a proposal to the community. So we shared, people knew, we shared at our budget presentation what the proposals were. We shared everywhere that we possibly could when our meeting was. And we had like 25 people come and speak at public comment. I did not cut it short. I was chair at the time. I let every single person in that room that wanted to speak. Because I think it's important for everyone to have that opportunity. So sometimes we have never had a separate meeting, but I could see where we have a book banning policy. So if someone wanted to try to ban a book in our district, let's say, we would have a hearing. We have an entire process that we would go through to address that issue. So my response to those potential budget cuts was to let everyone that came to public comment speak. It added some time to our meeting, but we heard parents, we heard current students, past students, retired teachers. We had such an outcry from our community, and other, some other committees will limit public comment. And I don't see how that would best serve our students or our community. I think it's important to hear everyone's voice as much as you possibly can. You're not always going to please everyone, but that was certainly a way to let people get out their frustrations. And I always encourage people to come to public comment to share whatever their concern may be. So I think it's a valuable ad to have.
Thank you for that, Stephanie. Anybody else in the panel?
Yeah, I'll just echo a little bit of what Stephanie said, and I'm seeing some comments in the chat, and I think we can probably talk about how public comments handled a little later. I think we might actually have that on our list. But similar to Stephanie, we've never had a separate public hearing. I mean, you can have them obviously if you feel that you need to, and you would just post it like a regular meeting kind of thing, and because you would have a quorum and all that fun stuff. But to Stephanie's point, public comment, it's up to the discretion of the chair in our committee. So we do have a policy in place that says only 5 people, but if it's something we know is going to be a pretty intense topic, like a few years ago before I was on the committee, but I went and spoke as a parent, they were going to change school start time. They did change school start time. And there were people on both sides, for and against. And the committee at that time, the chair allowed everybody who had signed up for public comment to speak, regardless of what the policy was. And I think that's something that as a committee, your chair typically has that ability to allow that to happen. And if it's something that the public has strong feelings on, you can definitely allow it to go on and let people talk. Obviously, you don't, if you think you're going to have 50 people sign up and it's going to be your whole meeting, maybe then you want to think about a public hearing, or not necessarily public hearing, but a community forum rather, or however you want to title it. But obviously you want to, if you're going to have public comment and still want to have your business meeting, you might want to consider how hot a topic it might be and how many people might come out. We've had instances in Mashpee where we thought we were going to have a lot of public comment, but we didn't. Obviously if we get emails, we try to handle those, but those aren't usually handled in public comment sections. So that's kind of how we've handled it in the past. But I agree with Stephanie, if people want to talk as a school committee member, we really should let them. And sometimes we do have a 3-minute we have a 3-minute timer on our policy, but we do encourage people, if they don't get through their full comments, email them to us. Read what you can and email the rest of the comments to us, and we as a committee do read them. So that's kind of my 2 cents on that one.
Thank you, Kathy. And I do see Jessica's question in the chat, so I'm going to take Jessica's question. She asks, what structure is used at a community forum? And I will answer that because I certainly, I was the chairperson during a year that we did a community forum, and we had declining enrollment at one of our elementary schools, and we had to have a very difficult conversation about whether or not we needed to close an elementary school. I'm sure we all can feel the parents came out in full force, and we felt the right thing to do was to have a community forum just on that one topic. So to Jessica's question about the structure, so we did publicize it as a public meeting because all school committee members were there. Our administration was there. We opened it up to our towns, anybody who wanted to come and speak. And we opened it up, called it to order. And basically the structure, I as the chair read the intention so that everybody understood why we were all there and what the topic would be that night. And then we let folks speak. We had everybody speaking to how they felt one way or the other. And that guided our decision. All of that feedback was very, very helpful to us as school committee members because we could take that and then go back and make, difficult decisions. So I hope that answers your question, Jessica. And if not, feel free to follow up in the chat. All right, let's move to the next question. How do we respond to an influx of emails? What can we say? That's one I get all the time. What can we say? What should we not say? What are some best practices when engaging with members of the public in writing? Kathy, I think I'm going to start with you on this one.
Thanks. So as elected officials, obviously communicating with our constituents is really important, and you will find times where your inbox may be flooded. When that happens, some committees will, defer to the chair and say, thank you for your email. I know for myself, I have like a 24-hour rule where I try my best to reply within 24 hours, if not no later than 48 hours, just because I don't want them to think they've gone into the nether world of email. So I try to make sure I at least acknowledge, thank you, I've received your email. I appreciate your comments. Thank you for taking the time to share. Like, just kind of, I always start with that kind of generic response. If it's something that is not, really too controversial, I might take the time to answer it. If it's something that, the chair really should be addressing, I will let them know, thank you. I'm going to be forwarding this to the chair. As our committee, we have a rule where the chair speaks for the committee. So, I may share some of my personal thoughts, but I'll make sure to clarify that this is my personal, I'm not speaking on behalf of the committee, but thank you, and here's what I'm thinking. I won't go too into detail. Obviously, there's going to be certain pieces of information that as a school committee member, the public might, especially executive session type of things, or anything that would be considered of that confidential nature, or something that you might not necessarily be at a point you can share with the public. You might want to hold on to that a little bit, and try to not necessarily avoid the question, but kind of let them know, like, the committee's working on this, that we are aware of the situation. We, or for example, we had an incident in Mashpee last year. Something was recorded and put out on TikTok. It made its rounds on the internet. We got a ton of upset parents saying, what are you doing about this? Obviously, with minors involved, there was a police investigation. There was all kinds of stuff that as a committee member, I was privy to that information, but I couldn't necessarily say to the public what I knew. So it was yes, we are aware, the police are aware, and give that, it's like, you want to give just enough that they know that you know what's going on, but not all the details that you're going to be quoted on the front page of whatever your town's newspaper is, kind of thing. So I found that does help. It does help to have that communication on that level, because people at least know, okay, they know what's going on. I'm going to let them handle it. And yeah, emails can sometimes stack up, but I think if you're on a committee, it's kind of part of the job that we as committee members have, is we've got to be responsive. And again, depending on what your committee's policy is, you may just be deferring them all to the chair if that's what your committee's policy is. So, and that's my practice. Like in my like just work ethic, like I will forward my boss, like I'll include whoever might be attached to that. If it's the principal and the superintendent, I might copy both of them. So that's kind of another trick here. And I apologize if my dog starts barking. He's like, what's going on here? But yeah, I think making sure that you're acknowledging what's being said and copying in the people or referring them and letting them know, hey, I'm going to loop in the superintendent here, or directing where it needs to go, is kind of best practices that I've tried to implement as best I could in my almost 5 years now on the committee.
Thank you. Thanks, Kathy. Anybody else want to weigh in on this question?
I think Kathy absolutely nailed it. That was a great answer. I will just say one thing that I always do as a school committee member is, and I've been the chair in Marshfield for 9 years now, so I'm typically the one answering for folks, but there's been a couple times where I haven't been, and when I do get those emails, or if it's something that's an issue that we haven't discussed yet as a committee, and I certainly don't want to speak for the rest of the group, even if I have some kind of idea on how I think I'm going to vote, I do like to something I say a lot is that there's a process for a reason, and I think there's a school committee process for a reason, right? Where that issue is going to come before the committee, and you may hear information at a meeting that you weren't privy to beforehand. And that might change your vote. That might change some questions that you ask. So I never like to back myself into a corner and commit to voting a certain way before a meeting, just as a best practice.
Okay, thank you for that. Anybody else from the committee want to weigh in on this?
I concur with Kathy and Sean. Nicely stated.
Great. And I am seeing a lot of questions in the chat. We are trying to answer them as we go along. I just wanted to, I'm not sure, Stephanie, I think you answered Erica's question. Thank you very much, because she was asking, do all the correspondences need to be mentioned during a school committee meeting? I see that you answered that, Stephanie. I think we all, I don't sit and read an email, but certainly it really just kind of depends on the situation. I think if we're getting an influx of emails all on the same topic, in my experience, have never read individual emails, but certainly referred to, we've gotten a lot of emails on this issue.
If for some reason too,
yeah.
Tina, you have a policy that states that they should be read during meetings, that would be a case where you should do that. But it is not the norm.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you very much. Yes, and we do definitely want to come back to policy, and I would invite everybody that's here tonight, do go back to your policy manuals, and because a lot of school committee members do things a little bit differently. And then let's see, there was one other one I just wanted to grab here real quickly. And I appreciate everybody's piping into the chat, adding best practices. Thank you so much. Steve was asking about the emails being part of the record, the meeting minutes. Anybody want to weigh in on that? We've never added, or at least on my school committee, have never added letters as part of minutes, but certainly
I can speak to
public
that.
record. Yes, April.
So we have, we're very blessed in our district that our district secretary for the school committee and the superintendent we would forward any correspondence or copy any letters that are some of their letters in advance to read as a statement when they are addressing us in public comment. And she will ask for copies of that to add to our record. We make sure also that, all of our we had recently almost a sign-in sheet where people who were there to comment that we did have their names and spelled correctly, so we could add them to the record. That need to come on. I know that a lot of districts, including ours, are doing some negotiations right now and going through some really challenging issues in the face of some of their contract negotiations, and that can sometimes stack the deck.
All right, it looks like we have lost April again. She was certainly full of words of wisdom. She'll join us back. She is having internet difficulty tonight. I just want to answer, Jessica did have a quick follow-up for me about the community forum, and I just wanted to circle back to her question. Jessica, you had asked about, do school committee members respond to people at community forum? My answer from my personal experience was no. We are there to hear what people want to say. So
Right.
we're not in a position where we're going to go back and forth. I think it's just to hear people. The only time, and this did happen, where there was some misinformation that was shared at the community forum, I did ask the superintendent to clarify something so that that misinformation wasn't kind of carried through the community forum. So that's really the only time I didn't personally respond, but I did ask the superintendent to address that particular comment. So I hope that answers your question, Jessica. And let's go on to the next question because I can already see a lot of things coming in on public comment. So let's go to public comment. While public comment at school committee meetings is not a requirement, what are the benefits of having it? And I know a couple of panel members spoke to this earlier. What are the benefits of having public comment? How long do we let it go? Should it be at the discretion of the chair? And if so, what happens when school committee members aren't in agreement with the chair's decision? Sean, I'm going to start with you on this one.
Sure. So first of all, I think the benefits of public comment are, um, pretty well understood among this group. It allows residents, it allows parents, it allows folks to come and feel like they have the opportunity to provide feedback or complaints, or certainly complaints, or any sort of information they feel is necessary to the committee. Public comment, it's in your policies, whether or not you will have public comment. That's something you should ensure that you have in your policy. Typically, public comment is 20 minutes. And what you need to do is you should be consistent with your public comment. So the chair at the beginning of public comment should note that we're welcoming folks to step forward and speak on public comment. The public comment period is 20 minutes long, and we will provide each person with 2 minutes. That also may be something that's stated in your policies. If you're providing everybody with 2 minutes, you absolutely need to be consistent with that. You don't want to give one person a little 20-second leeway and give them 2 minutes and 20 seconds and then be cutting everybody else off at 2 minutes. You absolutely have to be consistent with that. If the committee so chooses, they can take a vote if you have a 20-minute limit on your public comment to extend it. The chair is not the master of the body. The chair is the servant of the body. So if the committee disagrees with the chair's decision to cut off public comment to 20 minutes, they can make a motion. If there's a second, they'll have a vote. So that's kind of in a nutshell how public comment should work. But again, I encourage everybody to check into your policies to see how your committee handles that.
Thank you, Sean. Anybody else in the panel want to weigh in on that? I also want, Glenda in the chat says, since we cannot respond to public comment at the meeting, how can we best respond? Our community is increasingly frustrated with us for a perceived lack of response to controversial issues. So, Sean, you want to take a stab at that?
Sure. So
respond. Yep.
I mean, that's a tough question because you shouldn't respond during public comment when folks go off the rails like that. Public comment really should too be, and obviously you cut nobody off, right? Like they have a right to speak unless they're speaking on personnel issues. You really shouldn't cut anybody off in public comment. They're allowed to sit there and say pretty much anything they want to you about you because you're an elected official and you kind of give up your right to not be insulted by the people that elect you. So it can be tough though, because public comment should be kept to items on the agenda. And so if you've got controversial issues that aren't really popping up on your agenda and folks are coming to public comment and continuing to comment on those things, You know, that there's all sorts of different options you can explore. I always encourage folks to email me and let them know that they'll get a response from me on any issue that they email me about, even if it's not something that's on our agenda. But you can certainly fall back on the look, public comment should be about items that are on the agenda. There's no vote to be taken with this issue right now, but you can please feel free to reach out to me individually, and I'd be happy to discuss those issues with you. Or they can discuss the controversial issues with the superintendent as well. That would be an appropriate avenue.
Thank you for that. Anybody else from the panel?
Yeah, sometimes what also, and I don't know if this is, you know, this is what we've done sometimes, is ask for an agenda item at a future meeting so that we can discuss the topic in an open meeting. You know, if it is something that warrants a little bit more information, a little bit more discussion and deliberation, and maybe a subcommittee might need to meet, you know, we might hear public comment, and then we have at the end of our meeting items the chair may not know in advance. At that time, I know I've asked for an agenda item on a future agenda to be placed. And just like Sean said too, you know, telling people feel free to contact outside of the meeting and maybe we can sit down and talk. But, you know, again, depending on what the item is, sometimes you do need that agenda item at a future meeting to really allow for the committee to address the concerns or whatever the issue might be. And doing that really provides that stage for you to do so. So, you know, if you're hearing people making the same comments, it might warrant something on a future agenda. So that's kind of what I've done in the past.
And
you.
Kathy, jumping in on that too, hopefully you're on the same page with your chair, right? And your chair agrees. But if for some reason you believe that there should be an item added to a future agenda and your chair doesn't agree, it just goes, it's the same answer as extending public comment. You can make a motion to place something on a future agenda. And if the rest of the committee decides to second that and then vote with you on that, then the item is on the agenda and the chair can't take it off.
Yes, exactly. And I've been fortunate that we've never run into that need, but I
Right.
have heard other committees that have had to invoke that. And like Sean said, that is definitely something you can do should your chair not be open to adding that, or whoever helps make your agenda be open to that. So thank you, Sean.
I have one quick thing I want to add. I'm not sure how many school committees have a report from the school committee as part of their agenda, but Carver does. So it is the last item on our agenda for every meeting. So that's an opportunity where I typically, as the chair, will thank people who spoke at public comment. That's when I will kind of address it and say, thank you for coming. Thank you for bringing this to our attention. You know, we will follow up, and I will say to the, you know, I will make a request to the superintendent if necessary. I will ask, you know, the committee if anyone wants to add anything. So not to get into specific details about whatever the topic was, but just to acknowledge them, acknowledge their statement, and to thank them for coming and for speaking up, whether I agree with them or disagree with them, whether they were polite or impolite, whether they yelled at me and swore at me, or if they were perfectly kind. That I just try to be as professional as I can at all points in time. I know that's not always an easy thing to do when you have someone yelling and screaming at you. Who no one wants to go back to COVID. I'm sure all of us experienced some level of that. And someone asked a question in the chat, Susan, regarding that, and is looking for some advice on how to respond. How do you handle out of control parents during public comment, accusations, yelling, screaming? Currently dealing with decreased enrollment and have done multiple forums, you know, as possible for solutions. So I'm not sure if Sean or someone else on the panel would like to address Susan's question.
Sean?
I'm sorry, Tina, did you unmute? Or,
Oh,
okay.
go ahead.
Yeah,
Yep.
sure. So again, and I'll kind of roll this into Alan Frawley asked a question as well. He says he was under the impression that a speaker during public comment could say anything and it didn't have to do with the agenda. That's correct. You can't really cut them off unless they're talking about sensitive personnel issues, and you can ask them not to say that, but they can say pretty much anything they want. Now, if somebody's displaying conduct that is detrimental to conducting the meeting, or certainly if they're threatening violence or anything like that, you do have a right to remove them. You can stop your meeting. You can contact whoever you may need to contact for that. You know, you can certainly, as the chair should do, ask folks to try their best to remain civil and not to raise their voice or make wild personal accusations, but at the end of the day, they can say pretty much whatever they want. They can't threaten violence, and they can't, detrimentally affect the conduction of the meeting.
Thank you for that. And Amy and Glenda both were speaking about people that were coming and feeling frustrated. And I think it's always important, and I think it was Kathy that touched on this. I think the chair, it's important at the very beginning, because some people are coming to public comment for the first time and they don't understand that there's not going to be a dialogue. So it is really important for the chair to make some type of announcement at the get-go that public comment, we're going to hear you. There's not going to be a dialogue. Some of those things I do think need to be said by the chair, just so everybody's on the same page, everybody's clear. The other thing I will say to folks here tonight is look at your policies. And a lot of our school committee members have pretty strong policies and an outline. I know my school committee does on how public comment should go. And right after COVID, particularly around the mask issue, we actually went back and revisited what we had in public comment, and we had to tighten it up a little bit. And there are certain, nice rules that we have because, so we've got it all written in our policy manual. So if any of you feel the need, do go back to your policies and meet with your policy subcommittees and kind of clean up some of that language in your policy manual. So that would be, my response. All right, let's move to the next question. Let's assume that we voted in a particular way that upsets a group of people and they choose to vent their frustrations in an online group chat, but the information they share is incorrect. How do we handle unfounded accusations on social media? Stephanie, I think I'm going to start with you on this one.
I will say this is something that happens in my district on a regular basis. And I will say it's not our responsibility to manage comments on social media. It's not our responsibility as school committee members to monitor, all of the different groups that exist in our communities. However, I am a member of a lot of groups in Carver, and when there is an issue that is mentioned that has to do with the school district, I do read the post. I do pay attention to the post. And typically I will share that with the superintendent, depending upon how many comments it has. We had this happen a few months ago where there were a few hundred comments on a post. And I made sure that I made the superintendent aware. I made the rest of the school committee aware. Some of the other members had seen it, some had not. So I shared that information with them and said, okay, this is what we're going to do. This is what I'd like to see happen. What does everyone else think? We put the topic on the agenda and made it part of our goals and the superintendent's goals to make sure that we're addressing was about bullying. And sharing with the community that we have a bullying intervention and prevention plan. We have an anonymous reporting forms at both of our buildings that can be found on our website. We have posters with QR codes in our community, at our campuses, inside the buildings, outside the buildings. So just really sharing with members of the community that we are aware. Unfortunately, the bullying happens in every district, everywhere at some point or another. And Carver does a really good job. Some would say too good of a job of reporting that. So when someone makes an accusation, we file a report. They do a full investigation, and clearly you can't share all of the findings, like Kathy had mentioned with the situation in her district. You can't share you can't share what's happening, what their investigation looks like, those types of things. But we can address that. Okay, we do have this bullying intervention and prevention plan in place. It's updated on a regular basis, because to me and to the rest of my committee, it's a living, breathing document, right? As things happen, like we didn't have that anonymous bullying form until another member of my committee saw that Cambridge did. And she came to the committee and said, hey, I think this is something that we should consider having. And we were all like, you know what, that's a great idea. because sometimes people are afraid of retribution, so it just gives them that outlet. So we try to address what we see on social media through district communication. I have in the past, as a school committee member, shared information on my campaign page about some topics that have come up as a way to educate the community and say, okay, we have this meeting coming up. If you'd like to come, here's our agenda. If you have like something that you would like to see discussed, contact the superintendent, contact the building principal, contact administration. So it's really, to me, it's sharing what process, right? What process can I share with the public to let them know who they communicate with so they can have conversations? This, like I said, we're not responsible for policing social media, but I think that it can be helpful to be connected to it, so that way you can speak to administration and your superintendent and your school committee and say, hey, I'm seeing this as a theme. Have you heard anything about it? And then try to address that. I know, again, have those difficult and uncomfortable conversations. But it is within our purview to ensure that all of our students and our staff, right, feel safe, seen, and supported in our districts. So that's my approach to that. And sometimes it can be really difficult to not engage and to not try to correct them or, give them more information. But then you have to respond. If you respond to one person, in my view, you have to respond to every single person. And am I in every single group in my community on Facebook? I have no idea of knowing. So to me, if I can't respond to everyone, then I can't respond directly to one. So it's more just putting out informational posts or having the district send out, a message on School Status Connect or an email, put something in the newsletter or send a mailer home if necessary, and really have the district communicate around that topic depending upon what it is.
Thank you for that, Stephanie. Anybody else? Sean?
You're welcome.
Yeah, so I'll just jump in really quickly. Stephanie said it really well. You don't want to set a precedent. When it comes to social media, I think, this question kind of involves the answer of we have to come to terms with the fact that like 80 to 85% of what's on social media is misinformation. People are going to say one thing and it's going to get misconstrued another way, and then it just all spirals down, and it does nobody any good to delve into that world at all. So Stephanie's right. You don't want to set the precedent. You don't want to start answering people, but I really want to call out and highlight what April put in the chat, because it's very important to remember that if you've got, and I know every single town and city and everybody's got one or multiple, a town group like the Marshfield Forum, and there's an issue on there, and it's a school issue, and you've got all 5 school committee members in that forum. If you as a school committee member comment on that, you are breaking the open meeting law, because your 4 colleagues on the school committee can see what you're talking about. If it's deliberation, you're breaking the open meeting law because you're deliberating outside of the public body. So just be sure that you are, being better safe than sorry and not engaging when it comes to social media.
Thank you for that. I appreciate it. Kathy?
Yeah, I just want to kind of piggyback off of Sean's comment because, I've heard members say, well, that's where our constituents are, and we need to speak to our constituents and we need to be responsive to our constituents. Yes. However, social media can be, as Sean said, that spiral. You can, really start like a back and forth that isn't necessarily productive. And then you're deliberating, again, like Sean said, outside of committee meetings, which is why, personally, I don't engage on social media. I mean, yes, I have a campaign page, but I've toyed with taking it down just because I don't really do much with it other than repost things from the school. So, it's almost, what's more helpful, I find, is that, like Stephanie said, and like April said in the chat, maybe screenshot it, send it to your superintendent, send it to your school committee chair and say, hey, there's discussion happening. Do we need to address it? Should we address it? Here are the concerns. And then let, your chair, your superintendent kind of look at the agenda that's coming up. Is it something that's worthy of an agenda item? Or is it more the superintendent or school committee chair reaching out to that individual saying, hey, I understand you've got some questions, some concerns. Let's talk about it. Engaging on social media, yes, people are on it, but you can fall victim to the court of public opinion very, very quickly. And sometimes that information is not the whole picture or not correct information. And you end up trying to have to prove yourself, but it's tricky. So I try to avoid the tricky situations when I can. So yeah, that's my thoughts on that.
Thank you very much. And I think the only thing I'll add, because all of you offered some really, really, really good guidance. And the only thing that I will say, there is that rare occasion, particularly when it's misinformation. We're a school committee, or our school district is fortunate to have a community engagement coordinator. So there have been some times where I will see something and I do exactly what April said in the chat. I take a picture, I send it over to the community engagement coordinator because she's not an elected official. She's not bound by open meeting law. And she tries to be in all of the groups just so she can kind of see what's happening out there. And she might clarify something in a very polite, professional way. So I have certainly done that. I don't know if any of you have such a person like that, but it is very helpful. The other thing I'll just say, on a rare occasion, particularly when there's a huge issue happening and a lot of misinformation, I have nudged our superintendent on occasion to have an interview with somebody from the local media, to talk about whatever the issue might be, to have an interview, to get things cleared up a little bit, and it runs in the paper. So I think there's a lot of ways you can kind of clean up misinformation without us jumping in and engaging on social media. So just wanted to kind of throw that out there too. So let's move. I see some more questions coming in, but I'm going to move to our next question, and then we're going to circle back and make sure that we've got all of your questions in the chat. So feel free, again, if you do have questions that we haven't answered yet, please do drop them in the chat. Just put the word question in front of it so that we don't miss it. And if you have a best practice to share, and many of you have been sharing, thank you. Just put best practice in front of it so that we don't miss that too, because we do want to read those out. So the last question before we take our audience questions, while most school committee members have their chairs speak on behalf of the committee, how do we handle a press inquiry that's directed to one school committee member, maybe in a situation where the school committee member was the lone dissenter on a vote, or perhaps the only one in favor of an issue when the others weren't? So how do we handle that? Kathy, I think I'll throw it to you.
So, again, it goes down to, I'm always going to fall back on policy. If your committee has a policy that says your chair is the speaker for the committee, forward that to the chair. That's not to say you can't speak as an individual. You obviously are able to if you so choose, but I would think you would want to at least include your chair in that conversation. If you're the dissenter, I mean, you might want to share your opinion, but you might want to run it by your chair first, I would think. I always default to any media inquiry that comes to me if I'm not the chair, which I have been, but currently I'm not. Anything that comes in, I'm sending it to the chair and saying, hey, this came in. Do you want to answer it? If I answer it here, I might run by like what my answer might be. Just again, looping them into the conversation. The chair should always kind of know, I feel like, what's going on so that they're not caught off guard. Sean said that they serve at the committees, they serve the committee. They can't serve unless they know what's going on in the committee. So in that regard, when press contact you as a committee member for your opinion, again, I always acknowledge the email. Thank you for your question. And I might even say our policy is, that we run this through the chair, and just let them know, like, I've received it. But if it's something that I can answer, I might reach out to the chair first and say, hey, I'd like to answer this. Here's what I'd like to answer. Are you okay with it? Get the chair, make sure the chair's looped in, would really be my best practice on that, just because you don't want to avoid the press, obviously, but you also want to, again, not have, I don't like gotcha moments. I really want to make sure that any committee is going to work better when they're unified and know what's happening. So the more that you can inform your chair, who can then help you develop whatever might need to be responded to, or might say, hey, you can't mention that because we're working on this, or whatever. just running it by the chair is always kind of best in my mind. So that would be my take on that.
Thank you, Kathy. Anybody else want to weigh in?
I think I would just very quickly add to that, that remember when you join and you get elected or appointed to a school committee, you are part of a public body. And when a decision is made by that public body, you have a responsibility to uphold that decision, even if you may have disagreed with it when the vote came up. So if it becomes a policy of your public body, of your school district, it is your responsibility as a member of the school committee to uphold that policy and not do anything detrimental to it or detrimental to your district or detrimental to your committee. That can be tough, right? That can be tough if you strongly and firmly believe in something, and the committee decides to do the opposite of what you believe. That's a tough decision, but you do have that responsibility.
And thank you very much, Sean, for saying that, because once we've taken a vote, we've taken a vote. And I appreciate that follow-up. Stephanie, do you have anything to add?
Just really quickly, I'm not sure if other school committees do this, but every year our town election is in April. So at our first school committee meeting after our town election, we reaffirm our school committee protocols. So we have 12 of them. I will not read them all. I can share a link to it in the chat if anyone's interested. And number 9 is school committee members will recognize the single official voice of the board. We actually had this issue happen a number of years ago where there was someone who was unhappy with the decision I made as chair and decided to take that to social media and have it play out in the public. And then from there, we had complaints. And it was a whole grueling, like 2-year process that we had to go through from there. So it is best to, if you need a refresher, charting the course is always there. I've been on my committee for 8 years. I just want to quickly mention that you can always retake that. And these are some of the things that, they address there, or I'm sure MASC could have protocols on their website. These were in existence for my committee prior to my joining. I have added to them, but I think it's a good reminder, not only for the current committee members, clearly for new committee members, but I think it's also good to remind the community of what our operating protocols are.
Thank you
Thanks
for
for
that.
plugging charting the course. That's anybody can take that anytime. Come on down.
Yes, yes.
Yep.
And I highly recommend taking it every year, maybe a couple of years. I mean, it's always a refresher. And I've always said to the school committee members I work with, every time you're elected and reelected, you can take it again and just refresh yourself. So yes.
I
So
just
we're
want,
gonna,
can I
yeah, go
just
ahead.
quickly mention April left a really great comment too about this in the chat, but most of our committees are covered either by public access or by our local news reporters. So, they're gonna also be able to kind of help with that as well, help get that conversation out or help with those questions that might come in. So you can always, they're always there, I guess, is really, they're accessible. So don't forget that they're there usually at your meetings. So that was a great comment, April. Thanks.
Thank you. So I just want to jump in to some of the questions we're getting. We are trying to weave them in. I think we've done a pretty decent job, but let me ask this, because we've talked a lot about policy tonight. And Rachel asks, what do you do about members who disregard policy, about the vote of the committee being the decision of the body and take to social media? We've actually had a few questions about that. So what are our best practices panel for people that don't follow the policy we've all agreed that we're going to follow? What do you have to add for that? Sean?
I apologize. I was responding in the chat.
No, that's all right. Yeah. So policy.
Yes.
We've had a couple of questions here in the chat about what do we do? Like, we've worked so hard, we have a policy in place, but we might have a member or two that isn't following the policy. So what do we do?
Well, the member needs to be reminded of the policy. And again, they need to be reminded of their duty. It's incumbent upon them to stand by the policies of the committee. In cases of, in extreme cases, a member can be censured by the rest of their committee for not following a policy, especially if it's detrimental to the work of the committee and what you're doing for the district. That is not common and tends to be a worst case scenario for something like that to happen. But members really should be reminded as often as possible that they need to be following the policies if they're not. And I want to just state too, there was another question in there, which I was in the middle of typing an answer to, is what do you do when a member doesn't take charting the course? Kind of on that same line. The training is required by Mass General Law. When you get elected, you're required legally to take that training within the first year of your service. So it's just another case of reminding that member who might not be taking charting the course that, hey, just so you know, this is required by law. It's on record at your town or city clerk's office that you haven't taken it yet. And that's public information for anybody to go find out. And it's a great training. So please make sure that everybody's aware of the legal requirement to do that and is aware that we hold numerous opportunities for that throughout the year.
And then there was another question that just popped up about legal recourse if you don't take it. And I think, Sean, correct me if I'm wrong, but basically it's the same, you can be censured by your committee. And that's kind of like the worst case scenario, right? Is that your committee would censure you for not taking that, correct?
Right, that's correct.
Thank you. And we're scrolling through. Stephanie, Kathy, Sean, if you see a question I have missed, feel free to.
I want to just say, Stephanie, like, amazing job answering the questions.
Yes.
April too, thank you very much for doing that and making sure that everybody's getting all of that information. You're doing it so quickly. It's awesome.
Yeah.
You're welcome. My pleasure. I'm like, ooh, I can do that.
Yes, we want to make sure we're answering your question. So Robin, I think Robin got an answer here. Let me just double check. But Robin was asking, do any of you have school committee open houses, office hours where people can come and chat about anything? I think we mentioned that. Stephanie, was it you that had office hours?
I do not.
Oh, okay.
I do not. It's something that I had thought about doing for a while. But now that I'm working full time, I was not at the time. But I will. I try to be in the community as much as I can. Like if I'm at a sporting event, or if I'm at a choral event, or if I'm at graduation, or any number of events on our campus, I talk to people. And if someone asks me a question, I will 100% talk to them. And it's something that I'd like to do. I've been struggling with this past year. I've been struggling with the time to make that happen. But I do, also remind people during my report from the school committee that if anyone has any questions, to please reach out, to email me. My cell phone number is public. So I do encourage that type of communication with my community. Whether we agree or disagree, I want to hear, what our opportunities are, opportunities for improvement, what we're doing right, where we can improve. Because to me, it's a continual conversation. So, does anyone else do that?
We tried doing office hours. We tried doing a couple Zoom kind of info sessions quarterly with like focus on the budget and, what does the school committee do? And we had very low turnout. Unfortunately, we recorded all the sessions. So if you go to the Mashpee School Committee page, you can see like myself and one of my other committee members like talking to people, or talking to ourselves rather, because not many people showed up, but they are recorded. But we had hoped that might give people a chance to talk to us outside of the meeting. But unfortunately, we just didn't see a response. So does that mean I'm not willing to sit and talk with anybody who reaches out? No, of course I'm going to sit down and talk with anybody who reaches out. But we didn't find great success with office hours or setting it. And I don't know if that's a bad thing or a good thing. Either we're doing some things right and people don't feel the need to sit and talk with us, or they just don't feel comfortable. So take it how you will. I don't know. Again, I don't really know which is the right answer there, but we tried. And that's, at least we can say we tried. So.
Exactly. Thank you for that. And Amy had asked a question earlier when we were talking about public comment, and she said, And Stephanie, looks like you had a response there. We do announce our policy and it's written, but people aren't satisfied with that. It doesn't help that our local select boards do allow back and forth discussion. And this, again, I always think with a beginner's mind that sometimes people are coming for the first time. They don't know how public comment works. That's why our chair does have a little statement that she'll read at the front so that people are clear. We're not going to be engaging. We're there to listen. But Amy, I agree with you. I think when I'm out in the community, I understand the select boards do allow the back and forth, and that's very, very confusing to people. But I do take the opportunity. I've even educated a couple of our select board members who just, I guess, assumed we operated in the way that they do. We're very different. So I think the more we can say that and put it out, I think we have to say it several times. And again, I circle back to the community forum. I've always been of the mind that if we're hearing about this same thing at 3 and 4 and 5 meetings, maybe there needs to be a community forum. Again, we're not going to have the back and forth, but we're going to at least have a forum based on a topic that people obviously and clearly want to talk about. So we do offer that opportunity. And all of our policies, I think all of us can sit and write the policy we want. I know my school committee member, committee, and a lot of us here, we also sometimes, if we're here, like if we've got 20 people queued up at the podium, we do have another part that we'll read that says, if we're hearing the same thing over and over again, if you've got, a different idea, a different, way of saying something or something else you want to point out that hasn't been already said. So we have an outline and we can share, for those of you that might be interested, I'm sure through MASC, we can provide some really good examples of, policies around public comment. If you're interested, let us know. We can certainly provide that.
Mhm.
Any other questions? Let me get to the bottom here.
I saw one, I'm not sure how to pronounce the name. Is it Rush, Rush? What nuances are there for regional school districts? Our budget is an assessment to the towns and not part of the town budget in the traditional way. Our communities can be very different from one another, and engagement and outreach can look different. Anyone have any expertise? Tina, you're
I
regional.
think Tina would have some expertise. Yes.
Yeah, I'm going to speak to that because we've got an 8-member school committee and 4 from, each of our towns. And in fact, we had a select board member come to our meeting last week, and the towns for us are very different. And I would imagine in your communities, you're dealing with towns that are very, very different. So one of the practices we've always had is at the beginning of the year when we're all picking our subcommittees, we want to make sure that we've got a liaison, for every town. And that way, even if it's making a report at the meeting or just staying engaged with that particular town, that always helps educate the other school committee members that aren't from a particular town, kind of understand maybe where they're coming from. So that's kind of what we've done. And this is why we have a chair on my school committee, because we are regional. Our chair is from one town, our vice chair is from the other town, and then we alternate, every other year. And the chair, even though the chair is certainly the chair, the vice chair on our school committee has a very important role to play because the chair and the vice chair on our committee work very closely together to make sure we're communicating with all of our towns. So that's kind of how we do it. We take them all at the same level and try to understand the differences and how people are thinking about things, because we might have one town vote telling us to, we should do this, and the other town telling us, so our job is to hear all of these sides and to try to weigh all the options. Anybody else want to weigh in on that one? And if we did not get to your question, please feel free to post it again. I'm trying to scroll through to make sure. I think Stephanie, thank you very much, Stephanie and April, for answering a lot of questions.
And Tina, if we get to the end of the session and folks feel like they have burning questions that haven't been answered, or they have questions that come up later, you know, for many of you on here, if you're in my district, I'm your field rep, and I encourage you to reach out to me. I am available to you at any time to answer those questions. Liz LaFond is on here too. She's the field director for Western Mass. I know Liz is always available to answer questions for those in her region as well. Please reach out to us. We're here as a resource for you. So if you do have those questions, even if they're not answered tonight, you can always get us.
Yes, absolutely. So take another go here in the chat. If you've got other questions, a best practice you want to share, please do drop it in the chat. And as you're doing that, I'm going to take an opportunity to our panel this evening. You know, we've talked a whole lot about engaging with the public and all of these different mechanisms, but I'm curious, in your time as a school committee member, what was the one best practice that stuck with you? Like, just like, gosh, that I just am so happy that I got that piece of information. What was the one best practice that has stuck with you all of these years in your service as a school committee member when you're thinking about engaging with the public? Anybody have something that pops to your mind?
I can start. You know, people see a school committee member and think correctly that this is my voice when it comes to public education. Public education is a very complex, it's a very complex thing that can be confusing for folks. It can, you know, that there's nothing people care more about than the education of their children. So the job that you have is a really important one. The approach that I've always taken and the best practice that I apply to my conversations with people is you make sure they feel heard. You make sure they know that you're serving the community for their children. But especially in kind of turbulent times like what we're going through right now, is I always try to be like a calming presence for parents who reach out, because there's a lot of uncertainty, especially when it comes to your child's education. You want somebody who seems calm, cool, and collected, who can evaluate and think critically when it comes to situations that matter to them and their families. So I always just like to try and make sure people know that I hear them, and just try and have some kind of air of you know, respect for what they're saying, and that it's a solemn responsibility to serve their children's education. So I know that's kind of an overarching sort of practice, but it's really important when these folks reach out to you, no matter if they agree with you or disagree with you, they're coming at you from a place of anger, they're coming at you from a place of fear, that you're making them feel heard. And that at the end of the conversation, even if you come away from it disagreeing with them, or they're coming away from it disagreeing with you, there's some notion that this person is here to best serve my child's education.
Thank you, Sean. Anybody else? What's a best practice that has stuck with you? And April, I know you're having connection issues, but feel free to drop yours in the chat, or anybody in the room. Like, if you think about engaging with the public, what's one piece of advice that you have received that was really important to you? Stephanie, you're going to say something?
I know Kathy unmuted. Do you want to go, Kathy?
No, you can go.
Okay. So I've learned a lot over the last 8 years, being on the Carver School Committee, about best practices engaging with the public. But one thing that I love the most, and that I have been committed to, especially for the last 3 years, is elevating our student voice at our meetings. That's something that is very important to me, because, again, I want our community to hear their stories. So we have our elementary school ambassadors that come to our meetings, and they'll do a PowerPoint presentation, and they'll talk about things happening in their school. We have a middle school student ambassador program, where kids from our 6th through 8th grade will also come to our meetings to share what's happening in middle school. And then we have our high school student council that comes. We have captain's council, where the sports teams that are playing in the current season will come and give an update about what's happening with our sports teams and their accomplishments. And then we do have a student advisory Council, we do not have a student rep at this point in time, but we do have a subcommittee where we are meeting with the students and we're bringing their voice to our committee. And we also have our former AD adopted the sports student council. So athletes can join that to try to affect change in athletics. So for me, again, it's engaging the public. So to me, it's been an important focus of mine and my committee as a whole to elevate student voice, so that people can be reminded that we're all committed to children and that every decision we make is for the better of the children in the communities that we serve and beyond. So that's one thing that I've really tried to focus on since attending some professional development with MASC and the National School Board Association over the last 3 years, and really trying to make sure that our students are having the opportunity to share their narrative. So that way people can connect more. So that's one thing that I recommend is student voice where you can. Because I think that also takes away some of that angst that some people feel. Because, you know, when people are upset, they're, you know, disengaged, they, you know, have fears. So it's finding different ways to communicate with the public.
Thank you for that. Kathy,
So-
before I go to you, I think Clary Angeles, I think this was a question, Stephanie, for what you were saying. How do you handle coaching of the students? You were talking about the student voice. I think Clary, so how do you handle coaching of those students? I guess, and how maybe they're engaging with the public. I believe that question might be for you.
Okay. So at the elementary school, one of our associate principals, Dr. Pinella, she runs the student ambassador program there. So she works with them. They have regular meetings during our just what I need block, where they'll talk about what's happened in the building, because they come in, I want to say it's every 2 months. I think it's every other month that they will come in and do a presentation at the beginning of our meeting. So they'll talk about what's happened since the last presentation, and then they'll talk about upcoming events. So she works really closely with them to develop their PowerPoint presentation and to develop their talking points. They tell jokes, they sing, they'll dance. It's great, and they'll share videos with us. So they're given an opportunity to develop that with Dr. Pinella. So that's how it works at our elementary school. And then for middle school, we also have advisors that work with the student ambassadors from middle school. So same type of situation, they'll put together a presentation, not so much singing and the dancing and the energy of the elementary school kids, because they're fearless. And everyone's always laughing. So we have advisors that work with the middle school students, and then student council for the students at our high school level. And then our athletic director works with the captain's council, as do all of the coaches. So they'll, at the beginning of the year, have a meeting for all of them, find out who's interested, and then kind of go over what the process looks like. And then for student advisory, we have a subcommittee of the school committee. So there are 2 of us that serve on that, along with the superintendent, and we have regular meetings again during our WIN block at the high school with those students, to, you know, give them an opportunity to share, you know, kind of a SWOT analysis, right? Where we're succeeding, where our opportunities for improvement are, and then we bring that back to the committee at large, and talk about that during our meetings. So I hope that answers the question. So it takes like everything else in education, it takes a village.
Thank you for that. So Kathy,
Absolutely.
big best practice that you've learned over the years that's really stuck with you for engaging with the public?
Pretty much Stephanie stole my answer, but it's okay. We do it a little different in our district, though. I mean, every month we have a presentation, and we try to rotate through our 3 schools. So last month we got to hear from our 3 through 6 school about their after school programs, and we had students teaching us how to crochet. But having the parents come before you, I think in that aspect versus when they're upset about something, it creates that welcoming environment to know that, you know, it can be intimidating to come before 5 people sitting behind, or 7 people sitting behind, or in Stephanie, you know, in Tina's case, 8 people sitting at a dais and like having to say what you're thinking. And you know, I've seen people's nerves. I know my nerves sometimes can get a little, if I'm speaking before a committee that I've never spoken before, it can be nerve wracking. And so I think, you know, having those instances where we're celebrating the children, the reason why we are all doing the work we're doing, I hope, is because we care about the children in our community and making sure that their educational opportunities are what they should be. And so I think, you know, because we're all focused on that, creating that opportunity for students to come and present what they're working on, and then have the parents, you know, see that we're not just all figures and policies, that we actually do want to see these students and their successes and celebrate them, helps kind of, I don't want to say humanize us, but it really does, because we're no longer just this like ivory tower committee of 5. We're people who are clapping and applauding for your child who, you know, crocheted a poncho in 2 days because they did it in their after school program, or, you know, or who had a huge gain in their star math scores, you know, like those are the things that really create that community, and then open up that conversation path. I think too, and just again with Stephanie, with talking about the student committees, and we have a student advisory committee. It's kind of in its infancy still. It's kind of its first full year this year, but they're going to start reaching out to the 5th and 6th grade student council to start helping them understand what the process is. We used MASC's student advisory handbook to help get it going, and that's a great resource that's online if you haven't gotten your student advisory committee up and running, which is mandated by state law, if you didn't know that. So you should have a student advisory committee. You should have a student rep on your committee. So definitely, if you haven't done that yet, look into it. MASC has some great resources on that. And I think we were talking about maybe having another roundtable about that too. So because it is very important to elevate that student voice, and it does show those families and parents in our community that, you know, we are here for your children as much as we are here for our own, or we're here for all of the children if we don't even have a student in the district. I mean, we just really care about the kids in our community. And I think those are the ways to show that. And coaching, I mean, we've got staff members, but I've been kind of the liaison to that student advisory committee to help get them up and running, help them understand you're going to get the packet every week. You're going to be looking at the policies we look at. We want you to look at it the same way we look at it, and come to us with what you think as a student body. Talk about it with your fellow students. So it's a lot of just having those conversations. And our student rep, I see a question kind of, they come. So the student rep on the student advisory committee is a seated ex officio member of the committee. They sit, they are able to deliberate, they are able to participate in the conversations. They do not get to vote. We ask them what their thoughts are, but they do not get to vote. And it's been very eye-opening to hear like what we might have thought. You know, we had a cell phone policy recently last year go into effect, and we wanted to hear what the kids thought. Like, what are your thoughts on this policy? And we got their thoughts. They definitely had no qualms sharing what they thought about it. So having that perspective, though, there's certain things that we maybe didn't grow up with, like cell phones in a classroom. I know I didn't have one in my classroom. So understanding what their thoughts on it was really eye-opening and helpful in making that decision. So I can't advocate strongly enough for having that student rep. The presentations, on the other hand, like for the younger kids, they'll come, they'll do their thing at the beginning, and then they'll all go home. But we do encourage the parents to stay. They don't usually. So, but they know we're there, and they know that we're here to support them. So that's kind of, like I said, I find that to be very helpful and a best practice that has really stuck with me. And I continue to try to stoke the fires of, because I really feel like that's where our work meets the road, and really we can make those impacts that we're looking to make, and making sure that our students are having the opportunities that they need to be successful, whatever that success looks like. So
thank you, Kathy. And I'm just going to read what April had written in the chat. You know, kind of talking about engaging with the public, and she offered, I think, remembering to thank them, members of the public, for their concerns and reminding them that the kids are the priority. Some people tend to forget that we're all human and essentially have the children's best interests at heart, even through different opinions. So thank you, April, for always bringing it back to the students. And I guess, what I'll say, having a PR background, I do believe in listening to members of the public. And I always feel just do your due diligence, research, ask questions, listen to folks. And wherever you land on a decision, just stand with it. And this is something that I know I've spoken to school committee members after we've taken a hard vote. And I tell people, you just got to stand with it. Just as long as you're doing your due diligence and you've listened and gone through all the facts and the information and listened to everybody that you need to hear from, whatever decision you make, just stand with it. And just
Tina,
become, yes, Sean, go ahead.
Before you wrap up, I just want to say two very quick things. That at first is that Anthony Andronico from MASC staff, thanks for your help setting this up and recording and everything. But I also really want to thank you and Kathy and April and Stephanie for putting this together. Everybody at Division 7 for putting this together. I think this was super informative for folks, myself included, and I really appreciate you including me on it and allowing me to share some of my thoughts. But I just really wanted to thank you. I know this was a lot of work. I know you've been working on this for a long time. You and I first talked about this a couple months ago. I think you got me like right as I started. You said, "Hey, I want to do this." So I just really want to thank you and Kathy and April and Stephanie for everything you did to pull this together. I think this was really valuable.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Sean. And we're still getting questions. I mean, and we are after top of the hour, and I just want to thank everybody tonight for joining us. And, if for whatever reason we did not get to your question, please do reach out to us. MASC has so many great resources. I know we've all talked about it. Please do go to the website. If for whatever reason you're not finding what you're looking for, I think there's an info address there. We will help you get what you need. And Kathy and April and myself are Division 7. I think you all have your division officers. Please reach out to them. We're here to support you. Whoever your field rep might be, Sean happens to be ours. We're here to help you. So just if we didn't get to your question tonight, or as Sean had said earlier, if you've got a follow-up, please reach out. This is a hot topic, and we're all going through very interesting times, and probably will continue to have very difficult conversations. So please, please, please reach out to us. And I want to thank everybody tonight for their time. Thank you all for what you do in service to our students. Thank you all. I don't think anybody, maybe some of you get a stipend, but I think most of us do this for free because we love it. So I just want to thank you very much for your service. And with that, I'm going to say good night to everybody, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much, everybody.
Absolutely.